The crowd didn't just watch Evelyn Harrow get thrown into the frozen mud. They cheered. In a mining town where winter killed more people than the mines ever did, being cast out after dark was a death sentence wrapped in entertainment. The boarding house matron stood on the porch like an executioner, Evelyn's carpetbag sailing through the air to land with a wet thud beside her. "Whore!" Someone spat from the shadows. Evelyn's fingers dug into the ice-crusted ground, her breath clouding white in the brutal cold, and she realized with perfect, terrible clarity that she had maybe an hour before her body would simply stop fighting. Before we begin this journey into the unforgiving frontier, I invite you to stay until the end to see how courage is forged in the coldest places. Please hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The thing about dying in public was that it gave people something to talk about over supper. Evelyn could hear them through the walls, the families inside the boarding house, warm and fed, their voices carrying through the thin clapboard as they discussed her like she was already a ghost. The cold bit through her wool coat in seconds. Her fingers were already going numb where they pressed against the frozen boardwalk, and when she tried to stand, her legs shook so badly she nearly went down again. "Get up," she whispered to herself. The words came out in a white puff that vanished instantly. "Get up, Evelyn." But where? The question sat in her chest like a stone. She'd tried every door in Coldwater for 3 days, every shop, every home, every back room and storage shed. The answer was always the same. No women traveling alone, no women without references, no women, period. Her father's name meant nothing here. Worse than nothing. It was a joke. Richard Harrow had died 6 months ago in a town 200 miles south, and whatever reputation he'd left behind hadn't made the journey north. She grabbed her carpetbag and forced herself to move. Her boots crunched through ice, each step sending shocks of pain up her legs. The main street of Coldwater stretched before her like a gauntlet. 2 rows of timber buildings with oil lamps flickering in their windows, and in between, nothing but mud and snow and the kind of darkness that felt deliberate. A group of miners stumbled out of the saloon ahead. They saw her and went quiet. Evelyn's heart kicked. She knew that quiet. She'd heard it in the last town and the one before that. It was the quiet that came before men decided a woman alone was fair game. Well, well. The biggest one stepped forward, his breath reeking of whiskey even from 10 feet away. "Heard old Mrs. Fletcher threw you out. That true?" Evelyn kept walking. Her carpetbag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "I asked you a question." He moved to block her path. The others spread out behind him. 4 of them, maybe 5. The darkness made it hard to tell. "Ain't polite to ignore a man trying to be friendly." "I'm just passing through," Evelyn said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Please let me by." "Passing through to where?" Another one laughed. "Ain't nothing out there but snow and wolves. You'll be dead before morning." "Then I'll be dead." She tried to step around him. His hand shot out and caught her arm. "Now that's wasteful." His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't go to waste." Evelyn drove her knee up with everything she had. He howled and staggered back, and for one perfect second she thought she might actually make it. Then hands grabbed her from behind, yanking her off her feet, and her carpetbag went flying. She screamed and twisted, her elbow connecting with something soft, but there were too many of them, and they were too strong, and the gunshot split the night like a crack of lightning. Everyone froze. Evelyn's ears rang. The hands holding her went slack and she stumbled forward, gasping. "Next one goes through somebody's knee." The voice came from the shadows at the end of the street, low, flat, the kind of voice that didn't make threats twice. "Pick which one of you wants to walk with a limp the rest of his life." A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, taller than any of the miners, with shoulders that seemed to take up half the street. He wore a heavy coat dark with snow, and his face was mostly hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, but Evelyn caught the gleam of pale eyes and the dull shine of a rifle held low and ready. The miners backed up. The big one who'd grabbed Evelyn was still bent over, wheezing. "We weren't doing nothing," one of them muttered. "Then you won't mind leaving." The stranger's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He took another step forward, and Evelyn saw how the miners flinched. Whoever this man was, they knew him. They were afraid of him. They scattered, just melted back into the darkness like rats, their footsteps fading fast. The big one limped after them, still cursing under his breath. And then it was just Evelyn and the stranger, standing in the frozen street with gun smoke still hanging in the air. He looked at her for a long moment. Evelyn couldn't read his expression. The shadows hid too much, but she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Taking inventory, deciding something. "You hurt?" he asked finally. "No." Her voice shook. She hated that. "Thank you for... Don't thank me yet." He walked past her and picked up her carpet bag, held it out. "You got anywhere to go?" Evelyn took the bag. Her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. "I'll figure something out." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He was quiet again, studying her. Evelyn forced herself to stand straight, even though her legs felt like water, and her whole body was shaking from cold and fear and the terrible, crushing weight of having nowhere left to run. "There's a storm coming," the stranger said. "You can smell it. Be here in an hour, maybe less. You won't last the night out here." I said I'll figure something out. "You'll freeze to death." "Then that's my problem, isn't it?" The words came out sharper than she meant them to. She was so tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of running, tired of strange men deciding what she could and couldn't do. "I appreciate your help, but I don't need... I've got a cabin, up on the mountain." He jerked his chin toward the dark wall of peaks that loomed over the town. "You can stay there, work for your keep." Evelyn stared at him. "I don't even know your name." "Gideon Vale." He turned and started walking toward a hitching post where a massive gray horse stood waiting. "And you've got about 30 seconds to decide if you want to live or not." Every instinct Evelyn had screamed at her not to follow a strange man into the wilderness, but the alternative was staying here. And here meant freezing to death in an alley or worse. Here meant those miners coming back, and next time there'd be no one to stop them. She looked back at the boarding house. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Fletcher moving around inside, safe and warm, and Evelyn felt something dark and bitter curl through her chest. "What kind of work?" she called after him. Gideon was already swinging up into the saddle. "The kind that keeps you breathing." He held out his hand. "You coming or not?" Evelyn walked toward him. Each step felt like jumping off a cliff. When she reached the horse, she looked up at his face, really looked, for the first time. He had a hard jaw and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, and his eyes were the pale gray of winter ice. Not cruel, but not kind either. Just empty. Like he'd stopped feeling things a long time ago. "I don't know you," she said quietly. "No." He leaned down, hand still extended. "But you're out of choices, and we both know it." The first snowflakes started to fall, fat and slow, drifting down like ash. Evelyn thought about her father, about the promises he'd made that turned out to be lies, about the documents hidden in her bag that might be worth something or might be worth nothing, about how she'd come all this way and ended up right back where she started, desperate, alone, and running out of time. She took Gideon's hand. His grip was iron. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, and then they were moving, the horse's powerful stride carrying them away from the lights of Coldwater and into the darkness beyond. Evelyn wrapped her arms around Gideon's waist because there was nothing else to hold on to, and felt the solid wall of his back against her chest. "How far is it?" she asked. "Far enough." His voice carried back to her through the wind. "You scared of heights?" "Should I be?" "Probably." The snow came harder. Within minutes, Evelyn couldn't see anything except the dark shapes of trees and the pale line of the trail ahead. The wind cut through her coat like knives. She pressed closer to Gideon, stealing his warmth, and tried not to think about what she'd just done. Tried not to think about the stories she'd heard in town. The whispers about the man who lived alone on the mountain and came down only to trade furs and bullets. The man people crossed the street to avoid. The man she'd just trusted with her life. They climbed for what felt like hours. The trail got steeper, narrower. Evelyn's fingers went numb where they clutched Gideon's coat. Her face burned with cold. Several times the horse slipped on ice, and she felt her stomach drop, certain they were about to plunge off the mountainside into nothing. But each time Gideon made a low sound and the animal steadied. When they finally stopped, Evelyn couldn't feel her legs. Gideon dismounted and pulled her down after her, and she collapsed into the snow. "Get up." No sympathy in his voice. He was already leading the horse toward a dark shape that resolved into a cabin. Rough timber, low roof, barely bigger than a shed. Move around or you'll freeze. Evelyn forced herself to her feet, stamped feeling back into her legs while Gideon dealt with the horse. There was a small barn attached to the cabin, more of a lean-to really, and he led the animal inside. She looked around. They were in a clearing maybe 50 feet across, ringed by massive pines that blocked out most of the sky. The wind howled through the trees. Snow fell so thick she could barely see the tree line. The door of the cabin swung open. Yellow light spilled out. "Inside," Gideon said. Evelyn stumbled forward. The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace at one end and a narrow bed at the other. Furs hung on the walls. A rough wooden table sat in the center with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies took up most of the remaining space. It smelled like wood smoke and leather. It was the most beautiful thing Evelyn had ever seen. The warmth hit her like a wall. She stood there dripping melted snow onto the floor, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Gideon moved past her to the fireplace and stirred the coals. Fed in more wood, the flames leaped up, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "Get those wet clothes off," he said without looking at her. "There's blankets on the bed." Evelyn's brain felt slow, sluggish. She couldn't stop shaking. "Now," Gideon said, still not looking, "before you go into shock." She fumbled with the buttons of her coat. Her fingers wouldn't work properly. After a minute, she heard Gideon sigh, and then he was there, batting her hands away, undoing the buttons himself with quick, impersonal efficiency. He peeled the coat off her shoulders and tossed it over a chair by the fire. "The rest of it," he said. "I'll turn around." He did. Evelyn stripped down to her chemise and drawers with clumsy, shaking hands, grabbed a blanket from the bed, and wrapped it around herself. The wool was rough and smelled like pine, but it was dry. "Done," she managed. Gideon turned back, looked her over once, nodded. "Sit by the fire. I'll make coffee." Evelyn sank into the chair and pulled the blanket tighter, watched him move around the cabin, filling a pot with water from a barrel, measuring out coffee grounds, setting the pot over the fire. His movements were precise, practiced, like everything had its place and its purpose. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. Her voice sounded strange, distant. 6 years. "Alone?" "Yes." "Why?" He glanced at her. "You ask a lot of questions." "I just want to know who I'm—" She stopped. Who she was what? Trusting? Depending on? Trapped with? "Who you're stuck with," Gideon finished the thought for her. "Fair enough." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "I don't like people much. That enough of an answer?" Evelyn wrapped her hands around the cup. The heat hurt. "And yet you brought me here." "I don't like people much," he repeated. "Doesn't mean I let them freeze to death when I can help it." She took a sip. The coffee was bitter and scalding and perfect. "The men in town, they were afraid of you." "Yes." "Why?" Gideon sat down in the other chair, stretched his legs toward the fire. "Because I give them reason to be." "Are you going to give me a reason?" He looked at her then, really looked, not the quick assessment from before, but something deeper, taking her measure. "That depends on you," he said finally. "I told you in town you work for your keep. I meant it. You stay here, you earn it. I'm not running a charity." "What kind of work?" "Cooking, cleaning, mending, tanning hides when I bring them in. Firewood needs cutting and stacking. Water needs hauling from the creek." He ticked the items off on his fingers. "Snow needs clearing. Traps need checking. You'll learn to shoot and hunt, learn to skin game and preserve meat. Learn to survive up here, because come spring you'll need to decide if you're going back down or staying, and either way you better know how to take care of yourself." Evelyn's head spun. She'd never done half those things in her life. "I don't know how to do any of that." "Then you'll learn." No compromise in his voice. "I'll teach you, but you pull your weight or you leave. Those are the terms." "And if I leave now?" "Then you leave." Gideon shrugged. "Door's right there. But you won't make it 10 feet in this storm, and I won't come after you." Evelyn looked at the door, looked back at Gideon. His face was impassive. He meant every word. "What about—" She hesitated. What about sleeping arrangements? Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. You get the bed. I'll take the floor by the fire. That doesn't seem fair. Fair's got nothing to do with it. You're half frozen, and you weigh maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. You need the warmth more than I do. He drained his coffee and stood. Get some sleep. We start at first light. Start what? Everything. He pulled a fur down from the wall and spread it on the floor near the hearth, lay down on it, and pulled another fur over himself. Closed his eyes. Evelyn sat there holding her coffee, watching the firelight play across his features. He looked younger with his eyes closed, maybe 30, give or take. The scar on his eyebrow was old, long-healed. There were others too, she noticed. A thin white line along his jaw, another disappearing into his hairline. Gideon? She said softly. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. For saving me. For bringing me here. He didn't open his eyes. Don't thank me yet. Wait till you see what tomorrow looks like. Evelyn finished her coffee and set the cup aside, moved to the bed and climbed under the blankets, still wrapped in the fur. The mattress was thin and the blankets were rough, but after 3 nights of trying to sleep sitting up in hallways and storage rooms, it felt like heaven. She closed her eyes and listened to the storm howling outside. Listened to Gideon's breathing, slow and even. Tried not to think about how far she was from anything familiar, how alone she was up here with a man she didn't know, how completely her life had unraveled in the span of 6 months. Tried not to think about the journal hidden at the bottom of her carpet bag, and what it meant, and whether it would be enough to change anything at all. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow I'll figure out what to do. But tonight she was alive, and warm, and safe enough. It would have to be enough. She woke to the sound of splitting wood. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't remember where she was. The ceiling was wrong, rough timber instead of plaster, and the light was wrong too, gray and cold. Then it came back in a rush. The town, the miners, Gideon. She sat up. Her body ached everywhere. The cabin was empty except for her, and freezing. The fire had burned down to coals. Through the single window she could see snow falling, thick and relentless. The door opened and Gideon came in carrying an armload of wood. He kicked the door shut behind him and dumped the logs by the hearth without so much as glancing her way. Get dressed, he said. Breakfast in 10 minutes. Evelyn looked around for her clothes. They were hanging by the fire, still damp. She hesitated. Problem? Gideon was building up the fire, his back to her. My clothes aren't dry. There's spare shirts and trousers in the trunk under the window. Use those. She found the trunk and opened it. Inside were men's clothes, flannel shirts, wool trousers, thick socks. All of them too big, but they were dry. She dressed quickly under the blankets, rolling up the cuffs on everything, then climbed out of bed. Gideon had put a pot of something on the fire. It smelled like oats and salt. He dished out 2 bowls and handed her one without ceremony. Eat, he said. They ate in silence. The oats were plain and a little burned, but Evelyn was so hungry she didn't care. When she finished, Gideon took her bowl and set both of them in a basin by the door. Those need washing, he said. Water's in the barrel. Heat some over the fire first. You'll freeze your hands off otherwise. Evelyn looked at the barrel, at the bowls, at Gideon. I thought you said we'd start at first light, she said. It is first light. He was already pulling on his coat. This is the easy part. Wait till I bring a deer in, and you have to help gut it. Her stomach turned. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? He settled his hat on his head. I'm going to check the traps. Should be back by mid-morning. Get those dishes done, then start on the rest of the list. What list? He pointed to the table. A piece of paper sat there covered in rough handwriting. Evelyn picked it up. Wash dishes, sweep floor, bring in more firewood from the pile outside. Mend the tear in the green shirt. Make bread dough for tomorrow. I don't know how to make bread, she said. There's a recipe in the tin by the flour sack. Follow it. Gideon opened the door. Cold air poured in. And stay inside. Storm's not done yet, and you don't know the mountain. You go wandering, you'll get lost. I won't waste time looking for you. That's comforting, Evelyn muttered. She thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, but he was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him. Evelyn stood there in her 2 big borrowed clothes, looking at the list in her hand, and felt something that might have been the edge of hysteria bubbling up in her chest. This was insane. All of it. What was she doing here? But the alternative was going back down that mountain, and that wasn't really an alternative at all. So she heated water and washed the dishes, swept the floor, which was already clean, pulled on Gideon's spare coat, enormous on her, dragging almost to her knees, and went outside to get firewood. The cold hit her like a fist. Snow was falling so thick she could barely see the woodpile, and the wind cut straight through the coat. She loaded her arms with as much wood as she could carry and stumbled back inside, then did it again and again. By the fourth trip, her arms were shaking and her lungs burned. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of small tasks. She found the green shirt, a flannel with a ripped seam along the shoulder, and sat by the fire trying to remember how her mother had taught her to sew. Her stitches were uneven and clumsy, but they held. The bread was harder. She found the recipe written in the same rough hand as the list and measured out flour and water and salt. Kneaded the dough like the instructions said, though it felt wrong, too sticky, then too dry. She added more water, more flour, eventually gave up and covered the bowl with a cloth, hoping for the best. Gideon came back around noon. He was covered in snow and carrying 2 rabbits, their bodies stiff with cold. "Got lucky," he said, dumping them on the table. "These'll make stew for the next few days." Evelyn stared at the rabbits, at their glassy eyes and frozen fur. "You know how to skin them?" Gideon asked. "No." "Then watch." He pulled a knife from his belt and set to work. Evelyn made herself watch, made herself see how the knife slid under the skin, how the pelt peeled away from the flesh, how Gideon's hands moved with quick, sure efficiency. Her stomach churned, but she didn't look away. "Your turn," he said, handing her the second rabbit and the knife. "I can't." "Yes, you can. I just showed you how." Evelyn took the rabbit. The fur was soft under her fingers, the body still faintly warm. "I'll ruin it," she said. "Probably." Gideon crossed his arms. "Do it anyway." She did. It took 3 times as long as it had taken him, and she nicked the meat twice, and by the end her hands were shaking and bloody, but she got the pelt off. "Not bad," Gideon said. He took the carcass from her and showed her how to gut it, his explanations terse but clear. "You'll do better next time." "There's going to be a next time." "Lots of them." They made stew. Gideon did most of the work, but he made her chop the vegetables, such as they were, dried carrots and onions from the stores on the shelf, made her stir the pot, made her taste it and figure out what it needed. "Salt," she said after a minute. "How much?" "I don't know. A pinch?" "Try it and see." By the time the stew was done, Evelyn was exhausted. They ate in silence again, and afterward Gideon checked her bread dough. "Too wet," he said. "You'll need to work more flour in before you bake it." "How much more?" "Till it feels right." "That's not helpful." "Sure it is. You just don't know it yet." He sat down by the fire and pulled off his boots. "You did decent today, better than I expected." Evelyn looked at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." He stretched out his legs. "You didn't complain and you didn't quit. Most women I've known would have been crying by now." "Most women you've known weren't desperate enough to be here in the first place." "True enough." He was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. "Why are you desperate?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "You heard me. You showed up in cold water with no money and no plan, and you kept going even after every door got slammed in your face. That's not bad luck. That's running from something." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I'm not running." "Everyone's running from something up here." Gideon's voice was mild. "Me included. I'm not judging, but I've got a right to know if whatever you're running from is going to show up on my doorstep one day." She was quiet, trying to decide how much to tell him. "My father died 6 months ago," she said finally. "He left me with nothing. Less than nothing. Debts. I tried to make it work in our town, but..." She shrugged. "Women alone don't have many options. I heard there was work up north. Thought maybe I could start over." "And?" "And I was wrong." The words tasted bitter. "Turns out you need money to start over. Need references. Need people willing to vouch for you. I had none of that." Gideon nodded slowly. "What did your father do?" "He was a surveyor, land and water rights mostly. She didn't mention the journal. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He worked for ranchers, mining companies. Anyone who needed boundaries marked or water sources mapped. Must have paid decent. It did. When he was alive. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. He wasn't good with money or cards. By the time he died, everything was gone. Another lie. But not entirely. The debts were real enough. What she didn't say was that her father hadn't gambled it all away. He'd spent the last 2 years of his life gathering evidence, and it had gotten him killed. She was almost sure of it. That's rough, Gideon said. He didn't sound particularly sympathetic, just matter of fact. But you made it this far. That counts for something. Does it? It means you're tougher than you think. He stood and moved to the door, checking the latch. Storm's settling in for the night. We're stuck here for a while. How long? Depends. Could be days, could be a week. Evelyn's heart sank. A week trapped in this cabin with a stranger who barely spoke and expected her to know how to do things she'd never done in her life. Don't look so grim, Gideon said. You'll survive. Just keep doing what you did today. And what's that? Don't give up. He settled back down by the fire with his furs. That's all it takes up here. Don't give up, and you'll make it through. Evelyn wanted to believe him, but as she lay in bed that night listening to the wind howl and the cabin creak, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd traded one kind of trap for another. At least this one was warm. The days blurred together. Wake before dawn, eat Gideon's plain cooking, work through the list of tasks he left each morning. He was gone most days checking traps, hunting, cutting firewood from deeper in the forest. When he came back, he was usually quiet, speaking only to correct something she'd done wrong or show her a better way. He wasn't cruel. That was the strange part. He didn't mock her when she burned the bread or cut herself trying to whittle kindling, didn't lose his temper when she dropped a pot of stew and sent it splattering across the floor. He just looked at the mess, sighed, and told her to clean it up and start over. But he wasn't gentle either. When she complained that her hands were raw from scrubbing, he told her to toughen up. When she said she was tired, he said she'd be more tired if she froze to death, so she better get moving. There was no sympathy in him, but there was a strange kind of fairness. He expected the same from her as he expected from himself. Keep going, don't quit, survive another day. Slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, Evelyn began to change. Her hands stopped bleeding and started callousing. Her arms got stronger from carrying wood and hauling water. She learned to read the fire and know when to add logs, learned to cut meat without wasting it, learned that the howling at night was just wind, and the scratching sounds were branches on the roof, and if something bigger came prowling around, Gideon would handle it. She learned to trust him, a little. Not with her secrets, never that, but with her survival. He kept his word, slept by the fire every night and never touched her, taught her what she needed to know and didn't ask for anything except the work he'd promised. 2 weeks in, he brought her outside for shooting practice. You need to know how to use this, he said, handing her his rifle. It was heavy and cold. Something happens to me, you'll need to hunt, and you'll need to defend yourself. From what? From whatever shows up. He positioned her, adjusting her stance. Feet apart, stock tight against your shoulder. Yeah, like that. Look down the barrel. See that tree with the broken branch? Evelyn squinted. Yes. Hit it. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard enough to knock her back a step, and the shot went wide by a mile. Again, Gideon said. They stood in the snow for an hour while Evelyn fired again and again, her shoulder turning into one big bruise. She didn't hit the tree until the 23rd shot, and when she did, Gideon just grunted and said, "Again." By the time they went inside, her arms were shaking and her ears were ringing, but something fierce and bright burned in her chest. She'd done it. Not well, but she'd done it. That night, Gideon made stew again. They ate a lot of stew. And as they sat by the fire, he asked, "You ever think about what you'll do in spring?" Evelyn looked up from her bowl. "What do you mean?" "When the snow melts. You going back down the mountain or staying up here?" "I don't know." It was the truth. She hadn't let herself think that far ahead. "Can I stay?" He shrugged. "If you want. I could use the help. But it's harder in summer, more work, and more people come through, trappers, prospectors. You'd have to deal with that." "Would you?" "Deal with what?" "With me staying." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "I got used to being alone," he said finally. "It's easier that way. No one to worry about except yourself, but he hesitated. It's not so bad. Having someone else here. You pull your weight, don't cause trouble. High praise, Evelyn said dryly. The corner of his mouth twitched. Don't let it go to your head. They finished eating. Evelyn washed the bowls while Gideon cleaned his rifle. Outside the wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters. Gideon? She said. Yeah? Why did you really bring me up here? She turned to face him. You said you don't like people. Said you wanted to be alone. So why help me? He didn't answer right away. Just kept working on the rifle, his hands moving with methodical precision. 6 years ago, I got run out of a town, he said finally. Little mining camp down in Colorado. I'd been there about a year working claims, keeping to myself. Then one day, the foreman decided he didn't like the way I looked at him. Started spreading stories, got the other miners riled up. He paused. They came at me one night, 10 of them, beat me half to death and dragged me to the edge of town. Told me if I ever came back, they'd finish the job. Evelyn's throat tightened. What did you do? Walked. Gideon's voice was flat. Walked till I couldn't anymore, then crawled. Thought I was going to die out there. Then a trapper found me. Old man named Hayes. He patched me up, fed me, didn't ask questions, just helped. He finally looked up at her. I asked him why. He said because somebody helped him once when he needed it. Said that's how it works up here. You help the next person, because one day you might be the one who needs helping. So you're paying it forward, Evelyn said softly. Something like that. He went back to the rifle. Besides, you remind me of him. Hayes, same stubborn streak, same refusal to quit even when quitting made sense. He glanced at her. He died that winter. Fell through ice. By the time I found him, it was too late. I'm sorry. Don't be. He lived the life he wanted. Gideon set the rifle aside. That's more than most people get. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Evelyn thought about her father, about the promises he'd made and broken, about the journal hidden in her carpet bag, and whether she'd ever be brave enough to show it to someone. To show it to Gideon. Not yet, she thought, but maybe, someday. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me that. Gideon nodded, stood and stretched. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we're going to work on skinning. You need to get faster. Of course we are, Evelyn muttered, but she was smiling as she climbed into bed. Outside the storm howled and the mountain pressed close, and somewhere far below the town of Coldwater went about its business. But up here in the cabin, it was warm. Up here, for the first time in months, Evelyn felt like maybe she could survive this after all. By the time March arrived, Evelyn could skin a rabbit in under 5 minutes and hit a target at 50 yards 3 times out of 5. Her hands were scarred and rough, her body lean and hard from the constant work. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The desperate, frightened creature who'd stumbled into Coldwater was gone. In her place was someone who could split wood in a blizzard and gut a deer without flinching. Someone who knew the difference between the howl of wind and the howl of wolves. Someone who could survive. But survival wasn't the same as living, and as the days grew longer and the snow began to soften, Evelyn felt the weight of her secret pressing harder against her chest. She thought about the journal every day. It sat at the bottom of her carpet bag, wrapped in oilcloth, and sometimes at night when Gideon was asleep, she'd take it out and read her father's neat, precise handwriting by candlelight. Maps and measurements, dates and names. Water rights transferred illegally, land claims falsified, families driven off their property by men with money and guns. And at the center of it all, one name that appeared over and over, Marcus Thornhill. Her father had spent 2 years documenting Thornhill's crimes, had traced the water diversions that dried up wells and killed cattle, had found the forged deeds that stripped families of land they'd worked for generations, had interviewed witnesses too afraid to speak publicly, their testimonies recorded in cramped margins. And then he'd died. Thrown from his horse, on a road he'd ridden 100 times, his neck broken, the official report calling it an accident. Evelyn didn't believe in accidents anymore. She was reading the journal one night when Gideon's voice cut through her concentration. That must be some book. She startled, nearly dropping it. Gideon was sitting up by the fire watching her. She hadn't heard him wake. It's nothing, she said quickly, tucking it back into the oilcloth. Just my father's notes. Surveying notes? He stood and moved closer. Can I see? Evelyn's heart kicked. It's personal. Personal how? She met his eyes, saw curiosity there, but also something else. Suspicion, maybe. Or just the natural wariness of a man who'd learned not to trust easily. My father made a lot of enemies in his work, she said carefully. Some of what's in here, it's not safe, for me or anyone else who knows about it. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. That why you're really up here? Not just broke and desperate, running from something specific. It wasn't a question. Evelyn stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the moonlight turned the snow into a sea of silver. His name is Marcus Thornhill. He owns half the territory between here and Denver. Water rights, mining claims, railroads. My father discovered he'd been stealing land and water for years, bribing officials, falsifying documents, ruining anyone who got in his way. And your father was going to expose him. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. He was gathering evidence, building a case. Then one day his horse spooked on a flat road and threw him, broke his neck. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The sheriff ruled it an accident, closed the case in 3 days. You think Thornhill had him killed? I know he did. She turned back to face him. I can't prove it, but I know. Gideon walked to the table and sat down, gestured for her to join him. When she did, he said, Show me. What? The journal. Show me what you've got. Evelyn hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, she retrieved the journal from her bag and laid it on the table between them, unwrapped the oilcloth with hands that only shook a little. Gideon pulled the candle closer and began to read. He read for a long time, turned pages with methodical precision, his expression unreadable. Evelyn sat across from him and watched, her stomach tight with anxiety. She'd carried this secret for 6 months, hadn't shown it to anyone, hadn't trusted anyone enough to share the burden, and now she was trusting Gideon Vale, a man she'd known for barely 2 months, a man who'd told her he didn't like people and preferred to live alone on a mountain. A man who'd saved her life and asked for nothing in return, except that she work and learn and survive. Finally, Gideon looked up. His eyes were hard. This is real, he said. It wasn't a question. Every word. These water rights. He tapped a page showing a detailed map. This is the Fuller Creek diversion. I know this area. There were 3 ranches downstream that went under 5 years ago. Everyone said it was drought. It wasn't drought. Thornhill diverted the creek to his own property, let those families dry up and blow away, then bought their land for nothing. Gideon's jaw tightened. He flipped to another page. And this, the Blackstone mine collapse. 16 men died. Thornhill owned the mine. My father found evidence he'd been cutting costs on timber supports. When the inspectors came, he bribed them to falsify the report. Evelyn leaned forward. He's been doing this for years. Destroying people. Destroying families. And no one stops him because he owns the sheriffs and the judges and the land offices. And you thought you could? The question hit like a slap. Evelyn sat back. I thought I could get this to someone who mattered. A federal marshal, maybe. Or a newspaper in Denver. And they'd what? Publish it? Arrest him? Gideon shook his head. You're one woman with a dead father's notebook. Thornhill has money and power and men with guns. You wouldn't make it 10 miles before he found out. So I should do nothing? Anger flared in her chest. Just let him keep destroying lives? I didn't say that. Gideon's voice was calm. I'm saying you need to be smart about it. Rushing in with no plan gets you killed. Then what do you suggest? He was quiet, thinking. His fingers drummed against the table. Thornhill, where's he based? He has offices in 3 towns. But his main operation is in Bellwood, about 40 miles south of Coldwater. I know Bellwood. Something dark crossed Gideon's face. I worked there, before I came up here. Evelyn straightened. What happened? Same thing that always happens. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, asked questions I wasn't supposed to ask, got warned to keep my mouth shut. He met her eyes. When I didn't, they made sure I understood the consequences. The men who beat you, that was Thornhill? His men, same difference. Gideon touched the scar on his eyebrow absently. I was working a silver claim. Good strike, should have made me decent money. Then one day a man shows up saying the claim's been reassigned, shows me paperwork with the land office seal, says I need to pack up and leave. Was it legal? Hell no. The claim was mine, filed proper. But the paperwork looked real, and when I went to the land office, they backed it up. Turns out the clerk was on Thornhill's payroll. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I made noise, threatened to go to the territorial governor. That's when they came for me. The beating. Yeah. He stood and moved to the fire, stared into the flames. They dragged me into an alley and worked me over good. Told me if I ever mentioned Thornhill's name again, they'd make sure I didn't walk away next time. So I left. Came up here where no one could find me. Evelyn's throat was tight. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm alive. That's more than some people got. He turned back to her. But that's why I know what you're up against. Thornhill doesn't just have money. He has a system. Sheriffs, judges, land clerks, all of them bought and paid for. You can't beat that with a journal and good intentions. Then how do you beat it? Gideon looked at the journal lying open on the table, at the pages covered in her father's careful handwriting. You make it public, not through official channels. Those are all corrupt. You make it so public and so loud that Thornhill can't silence it. Get enough people on your side that his money doesn't matter anymore. How? I don't know yet. He sat back down. But we've got time. Spring's coming, but the pass won't be clear for another month at least. We use that time to prepare. Make a plan. Figure out who we can trust and who we can't. Evelyn stared at him. We? You think I'm letting you walk into that alone? Something fierce flickered in his eyes. Thornhill took everything from me once. Took my claim, my money, my pride. Left me bleeding in the dirt like I was nothing. He tapped the journal. This is proof, real proof. If there's a chance to bring him down, I'm taking it. You don't owe me anything, Gideon. Maybe not, but I owe him. His voice was hard. And I pay my debts. They sat in silence. The fire popped and crackled. Outside an owl called, long and mournful. There's something else, Evelyn said quietly, in the back of the journal. My father wrote down names of people who might help, people Thornhill hadn't gotten to yet. I don't know if any of them are still alive or if they'd be willing to stand up against him, but show me. She flipped to the last pages. Her father's handwriting was shakier here, like he'd been writing in a hurry. A list of names with brief notes beside each one. Samuel Garrett, Coldwater. Merchant. Lost his store to Thornhill, possible ally. Catherine Webb, Bellwood. Schoolteacher. Witnessed the Blackstone collapse. Too afraid to speak publicly, but might testify if protected. Daniel Cross, Federal Marshal, Denver. Honest. Outside Thornhill's reach, there were others, a dozen names scattered across 3 territories, some marked with question marks. One crossed out with a heavy black line. Your father did his homework, Gideon said. He was thorough. Evelyn's voice caught. He thought if he just had enough evidence, enough witnesses, someone would listen. Someone would care. Maybe someone will. Gideon closed the journal carefully. But we do this smart. We start in Coldwater. Talk to this Garrett if he's still there. Feel him out. If he's willing to help, we move to the next name. Build a network. Get enough people together that when we make our move, Thornhill can't shut us all up. And if no one's willing to help, then we make noise anyway. He met her eyes. Sometimes that's all you can do. Make enough noise that people have to pay attention. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to think that her father's death could mean something, that the journal could actually change things. But she'd spent 6 months running and hiding, and she was so tired of being afraid. What if it's not enough? She whispered. Then at least we tried. Gideon's voice was steady. That's better than living up here wondering what might have happened if we'd been braver. He was right. She knew he was right, but the weight of it still pressed down on her chest like a stone. Okay, she said. We try. Gideon nodded, stood and moved to the window. Storm's clearing. We should get some sleep. Come morning, we start training harder. Training for what? Everything. He glanced back at her. If we're going up against Thornhill, you need to be ready. Not just to shoot and skin rabbits. You need to know how to handle yourself in a fight, how to move quiet, how to stay calm when things go bad. He paused. How to survive if something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that. His voice was matter of fact. So we prepare for it anyway. The next morning, Gideon woke her before dawn and took her outside into the snow. The air was sharp and cold, and the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. We're going to spar, he said. Evelyn blinked. What? Fight, you and me. He pulled off his coat and tossed it aside. You need to learn how to defend yourself without a gun. Most fights happen close and fast. You won't have time to reload or aim. You need to know what to do when someone gets their hands on you. I already know. I kick them and run. And if you can't run? He moved into a fighting stance. Come at me. Evelyn hesitated. Then she rushed forward and threw a wild punch. Gideon caught her wrist, twisted, and she was on her back in the snow before she even registered what happened. Again, he said, offering his hand. They sparred for an hour. Evelyn ended up on her back more times than she could count. Her body ached, her pride stung, and by the end she was furious and exhausted and covered in snow. You're getting better, Gideon said. I haven't landed a single hit. No, but you're lasting longer before I put you down. That's progress. He pulled her to her feet. We do this every morning. By the time we leave, you'll be able to hold your own. Are you always this optimistic? The corner of his mouth twitched. Come on, let's get breakfast. They fell into a new routine. Mornings were for fighting and shooting. Afternoons were for the regular work, hunting, cooking, maintaining the cabin. Evenings were for planning. They went through the journal page by page, memorizing names and dates and evidence. Gideon quizzed her until she could recite water diversion routes and land claim numbers from memory. If they take the journal, you need to be able to testify without it, he said. Every detail matters. What if I forget something? Then you remember enough to make people listen. That's all we need. The days grew longer. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. The creek that ran past the cabin started to flow again, no longer locked under ice. Birds returned, their calls echoing through the trees, and Evelyn changed. Not just physically, though she was stronger now, faster, her reflexes honed by weeks of practice, but something deeper. The fear that had lived in her chest since her father's death began to transform into something else, something harder and sharper. Anger. She was angry at Thornhill for destroying her father, angry at the system that let him do it, angry at herself for running instead of fighting back. One morning, she finally landed a hit. Gideon came at her and she sidestepped, drove her elbow into his ribs, and when he grabbed for her, she twisted away and swept his legs. He went down hard. For a second, they just stared at each other. Then Gideon started laughing. About time, he said, getting to his feet. Thought you were going to let me win forever. Evelyn was breathing hard, her heart pounded. Again. They went 3 more rounds. She didn't win any of them, but she made him work for it. When they finally stopped, both of them were sweating despite the cold. You're ready, Gideon said. For what? For whatever comes next. He picked up his coat. Another week, and the pass should be clear enough to ride. We'll head down to Coldwater, find Garrett, see if he'll help. And if he won't? Then we move to the next name on the list. Gideon looked at her. We don't stop until someone listens. That's the deal. Evelyn nodded. The fear was still there, but it didn't control her anymore. Okay. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to Gideon's breathing and thinking about Coldwater, about walking back into that town where people had watched her get thrown into the street and done nothing, about facing the miners who'd tried to hurt her, the boarding house matron who'd cast her out, about whether she was brave enough to do this. You awake? Gideon's voice came from the darkness. Yeah. Scared? Evelyn thought about lying. Yes. Good. Rustling as he shifted on his furs. Being scared means you're smart. It's the people who aren't scared who get killed. That's comforting. Wasn't meant to be comforting, was meant to be true. A pause. You don't have to do this, you know. We could stay up here, wait out the summer, see if things blow over. Things won't blow over. Thornhill's not going to stop. Probably not. But you'd be safe. Evelyn stared at the ceiling. Safe. She'd been safe up here for 2 months. Safe and hidden and useless while Thornhill kept destroying lives. My father spent 2 years gathering that evidence, she said quietly. He died for it. If I don't at least try to use it, then what was the point? He died for nothing. He died because he tried to fight a man with more money and power than sense. There's no shame in staying alive. There is if I do it by hiding. She sat up. I'm not asking you to come with me, Gideon. This is my fight. But I'm going down that mountain and I'm going to find someone who will listen, even if I have to knock on every door between here and Denver. Silence. Then Gideon laughed softly. You're stubborn as hell, you know that? You're not the first person to tell me that. I'm sure I won't be the last either. More rustling as he stood, moved to sit on the edge of her bed. She could just make out his shape in the darkness. I meant what I said before. I'm with you on this, all the way. But I need you to understand what we're walking into. I understand. Do you? His voice was serious. Thornhill has killed people, Evelyn. Your father, probably others. He's not going to just let us waltz in and destroy everything he's built. The second he finds out we're asking questions, he's going to come for us, and he won't be gentle about it. I know. And you're still willing to do this? She thought about her father, about the families in the journal whose lives had been destroyed, about the miners who died in the Blackstone collapse because Thornhill cared more about money than safety. Yes, she said, I'm still willing. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip strong and steady. Then we do this together, he said. You and me. We watch each other's backs and we don't stop fighting until it's done. Together, Evelyn echoed. He squeezed her hand once and let go. Stood and moved back to his furs by the fire. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. But Evelyn lay awake for hours, her hand still warm where he'd held it, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation and something else she couldn't quite name. The week passed in a blur of preparation. They packed supplies, food, ammunition, blankets. Gideon cleaned and oiled his rifle, sharpened his knives, checked every piece of gear twice. He taught Evelyn how to pack a horse properly, how to distribute weight so it wouldn't shift on rough terrain. Everything has to be balanced, he said. The horse stumbles. We could lose it all. On the last night before they left, they sat by the fire and went through the plan one more time. We ride to Coldwater, Gideon said. Find Garrett. Don't approach him in public, too many eyes. We wait until he's alone, then we talk to him. Feel him out. If he's willing to help, we bring him into the fold. If not, we move on. And if Thornhill's men are watching, then we're careful. We don't take risks we don't have to. He looked at her. You stay close to me. You don't go anywhere alone. You see something that feels wrong, you tell me immediately. I'm not helpless, Gideon. I know you're not. But you're also not invisible. A woman traveling with a mountain man is going to attract attention. We use that. Let people think I'm your husband or your brother. Let them underestimate you. Evelyn nodded slowly. All right. And the journal stays hidden. We don't show it to anyone until we're absolutely sure we can trust them. Where should we keep it? Gideon thought for a moment. On you. Wrapped tight and tucked inside your clothes. If something happens to me, you run. You get that journal to Denver and you find Daniel Cross, the marshal. You give it to him and no one else. Nothing's going to happen to you. Probably not. But if it does, you keep going. Promise me. Evelyn met his eyes, saw the seriousness there, the determination. I promise. He nodded, stood and stretched. Get some sleep. We leave at first light. But Evelyn stayed by the fire long after he'd settled down, staring into the flames and thinking about everything that could go wrong, and everything that might go right. When dawn came, they loaded the horse and locked the cabin. Gideon took one last look around, then swung into the saddle and pulled Evelyn up behind him. You ready? He asked. Evelyn wrapped her arms around his waist and looked back at the cabin. It had been her refuge, her prison, her training ground, the place where she'd learned to survive. Now it was time to learn how to fight. I'm ready, she said. They rode down the mountain as the sun climbed higher, leaving the safety of the wilderness behind and heading toward a town that had once turned its back on her. This time Evelyn wasn't running. This time she was coming back to make them listen. The ride down took most of the day. The trail was treacherous with mud and melting ice, and twice they had to dismount and lead the horse across sections where the ground had washed away completely. By the time Coldwater came into view, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, and Evelyn's whole body ached from gripping the saddle. The town looked smaller than she remembered, meaner. 2 rows of weathered buildings squatting in the mud like they were ashamed to be there. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, and even from a distance she could hear the sounds of the saloon, rough laughter, breaking glass, someone playing a badly tuned piano. "We're not staying at the boarding house," Gideon said. His voice was low, meant only for her. "Too many questions. There's a stable at the south end of town. Owner rents out a room above it. Not much, but it's private." "Will he remember me?" "Probably, but he minds his business." Gideon urged the horse forward. "Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Let me do the talking." They rode into town as the lamplighters were making their rounds. A few people glanced their way, but most were too focused on getting inside and getting warm to pay much attention. Evelyn kept her face turned toward Gideon's back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stable was exactly where Gideon said it would be. A squat building with peeling paint and a sign that read "Walker's Livery" hanging crooked above the door. Gideon dismounted and helped Evelyn down, then led the horse inside. The owner was an old man with a bent back and rheumy eyes. He looked up from mucking a stall and squinted at them. "Vale," he said. No surprise in his voice, just recognition. "Been a while." "Walker." Gideon handed him the reins. "Need a stall for the night and the room upstairs if you've got it." Walker's gaze slid to Evelyn, lingered. She resisted the urge to shrink back. "$1 for the stall, 2 for the room," Walker said finally. "Payment up front." Gideon counted out coins and pressed them into the old man's palm. "Grain for the horse, too. He's had a hard ride." "I'll see to it." Walker pocketed the money and gestured toward a narrow staircase at the back of the stable. "Room's at the top. Sheets are clean enough. You need anything else, you come find me." "We will." They climbed the stairs. The room was barely bigger than a closet, a sagging bed, a washstand, a single window overlooking the back alley. But it was dry and relatively warm, and after 2 months in the cabin it felt almost luxurious. Gideon dropped their packs on the floor and moved to the window. Looked out at the darkening street. "We wait until morning," he said. "Find Garrett when the town's awake and moving. Easier to blend in." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed. It creaked ominously. "Do you know what he looks like?" "No, but your father's notes said he ran a mercantile. Can't be that many in a town this size." He turned away from the window. "You should eat something, then get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long." They ate cold jerky and hardtack from their supplies. Evelyn's stomach was too tight with nerves to manage more than a few bites, but she forced herself to chew and swallow. Gideon was right. She needed her strength. When full darkness fell, Gideon wedged a chair under the door handle and stretched out on the floor with his rifle across his chest. Within minutes, he was asleep, or at least pretending to be. Evelyn lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Voices drifted up from the street below, men arguing, a woman's high-pitched laugh, someone singing badly. The sounds of a town that had forgotten her, or never cared in the first place. She touched the journal tucked inside her shirt. The edges pressed against her ribs, solid and real. Tomorrow they would take the first step. Tomorrow everything would change, if they survived it. Morning came too fast. Gideon shook her awake before dawn, and they dressed quickly in the gray light. Evelyn braided her hair tight and tucked it under a borrowed hat. In the mirror she looked almost like a boy, lean and hard, her face weathered from months on the mountain. "Better," Gideon said when he saw her. "Less memorable." They left the stable just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. The street was nearly empty, just a few early risers heading to work. They walked toward the center of town, keeping to the shadows, and Evelyn's eyes scanned every face they passed. None of them looked familiar. Or maybe they all did. The same suspicious glances, the same hard mouths, the same sense that strangers weren't welcome here. They found the mercantile 2 blocks from the saloon, a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read Garrett's Goods and Sundries. The windows were dark, but smoke rose from the chimney. "He's here," Gideon said quietly. "Wait across the street. Watch for anyone paying too much attention." Evelyn positioned herself near a water trough where she had a clear view of the mercantile's entrance. Gideon crossed the street and knocked on the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door cracked open and a man peered out. Middle-aged, balding, with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. He said something Evelyn couldn't hear, and Gideon responded. The conversation went back and forth, Garrett's expression growing more suspicious with each exchange. Then Gideon said something that made Garrett go very still. His hand gripped the doorframe hard enough that Evelyn could see his knuckles turn white even from across the street. Garrett looked around nervously, then stepped back and gestured Gideon inside. The door closed. Evelyn waited. 5 minutes. 10. Her palms were sweating despite the cold. A woman walked past pushing a handcart, and Evelyn turned away, pretending to study the water in the trough. When she looked back, 2 men were walking down the street from the direction of the saloon. Both wore badges. Both had guns on their hips. Evelyn's heart stopped. The sheriff and his deputy. They were heading straight for the mercantile. She didn't think, just moved. Crossed the street in 3 quick strides and pushed through the mercantile door. Inside, Gideon and Garrett stood by the counter. The journal lay open between them. Both men looked up sharply as she entered. "Sheriff," Evelyn said, "coming this way, 30 seconds." Gideon's hand moved to his gun. Garrett went white. "They can't see that," Garrett hissed, grabbing the journal and shoving it under the counter. "If they see that we're all dead." "Back room," Gideon said. "Now." Garrett shook his head frantically. "No, you hide. They'll know something's wrong. Just be customers. You're buying supplies. That's all." The door opened. The sheriff walked in, his deputy trailing behind. He was a big man with a gut that hung over his belt and small, mean eyes. Those eyes swept the room and landed on Gideon. "Vale," he said. The word wasn't friendly. "Heard you were back." "Sheriff Hollis." Gideon's voice was flat. "Just picking up some supplies." "That right?" Hollis's gaze moved to Evelyn, lingered. "Who's this?" "My wife." The lie came out smooth and easy. "Got married over the winter." "Wife." Hollis stepped closer. "Funny. Don't recall seeing you around before, ma'am." Evelyn forced herself to meet his eyes. "We keep to ourselves, Sheriff. Up on the mountain." "Mountain." Hollis looked back at Gideon. "Thought you swore you'd never set foot in this town again after what happened in Bellwood. Things change." "They sure do." The sheriff's hand rested on his gun. Not threatening, not yet, just present. "What kind of supplies you need that couldn't wait for warmer weather? Coffee, salt, ammunition?" Gideon gestured to the counter where Garrett stood frozen. Garrett was just putting together an order. "Was he now?" Hollis turned to the merchant. "That true, Garrett?" Garrett's Adam's apple bobbed. "Yes, Sheriff. Just helping out a customer." "Customer?" Hollis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know, Vale, there's been some talk, people wondering why a man who hates civilization so much would suddenly come down from his hole in the ground. Some folks might think you're up to something." "Some folks think too much," Gideon said. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. The deputy's hand had moved to his gun too, and Evelyn could see the calculation in his eyes. They were looking for an excuse. Any excuse. "Sheriff," Garrett's voice was shaky but determined. "These people are just buying supplies. They haven't caused any trouble." "Yet," Hollis said. He took a step closer to Gideon. They were almost nose to nose now. "You remember what I told you, Vale? About what would happen if you ever came back here making noise?" "I remember." "Good. Because I'd hate to have to remind you." Hollis's smile widened. "You get your supplies, and you get gone. And if I hear you've been asking questions or stirring up trouble, we're going to have a conversation, the kind that ends with you in a cell. Or a grave. We clear?" "Clear," Gideon said. Hollis stared at him for another long moment, then turned and walked out. The deputy followed, but not before shooting one more suspicious look at all 3 of them. The door closed. Garrett sagged against the counter like his strings had been cut. "He knows," Garrett whispered. "He knows something." "He suspects," Gideon corrected. "That's different. If he knew, we'd already be in chains. You need to leave. Both of you. Now." Garrett pulled the journal from under the counter and shoved it at Evelyn. "Take this and go. I can't help you. I'm sorry, but I can't." "Your store," Evelyn said. My father wrote that Thornhill took it from you. How? Garrett's face crumpled. Same way he takes everything. I had a loan with the bank. Small one, for inventory. I was paying it back on time, never missed a payment. Then one day the bank manager, Thornhill's man, tells me the terms have changed. Interest rate tripled. Payment due in full in 30 days or they take the building. He took off his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. I couldn't pay it. Lost everything. Had to rent this place just to stay in business. And you didn't fight back? The words came out harsher than Evelyn meant them to. Fight back? Garrett laughed bitterly. With what? I went to the sheriff. He told me it was a civil matter and to take it up with a lawyer. I went to a lawyer. He took my money and then told me there was nothing he could do because the contract was legal. Legal. He spat the word. Everything Thornhill does is legal because he owns the people who make the laws. Not everything, Evelyn said. She opened the journal to a marked page. Look, this is your store, isn't it? The original loan documents. My father found the real terms. The interest rate was never supposed to change. Someone at the bank falsified the paperwork. Garrett stared at the page. His hand shook as he reached out to touch it. This is proof? It's proof the bank committed fraud, and if we can prove that, we can prove a pattern. Show that Thornhill's been doing this to dozens of people. Evelyn leaned forward. But we need help. We need people willing to stand up and testify. They'll kill anyone who testifies. Garrett's voice was hollow. You don't understand. Thornhill doesn't just ruin you financially. He destroys you, your family, everything you care about. There's a reason no one speaks out against him. Because everyone's too scared, Gideon said. And as long as everyone stays scared, he wins. He's already won. No. Evelyn slammed her hand on the counter. He's won because good people like you decided it was easier to give up than fight back. But my father didn't give up. He spent 2 years gathering this evidence, and it got him killed. And I'll be damned if I let that mean nothing. Garrett looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing her for the first time. You're Harrow's daughter, Richard Harrow. Yes. I heard he died. Horse accident. Murder, Evelyn said flatly. Thornhill had him killed because he was getting too close to the truth. Garrett was silent for a long moment. His hands trembled as he closed the journal. Even if I wanted to help, and I'm not saying I do, what could I possibly do? I'm nobody, a failed merchant in a nothing town. You're a witness, Gideon said, and you're not alone. There are others. The school teacher in Bellwood, the families who lost their land to the water diversions, the miners who survived the Blackstone collapse. We find them, bring them together, make enough noise that Thornhill can't silence all of us. And you think that'll work? Garrett shook his head. You think making noise is enough to bring down a man who owns half the territory? I think it's better than hiding, Evelyn said quietly. Better than letting him keep destroying lives. Better than living the rest of your life knowing you could have done something and chose not to. The words hung in the air. Outside, the town was waking up fully now. Voices, footsteps, the rattle of wagon wheels on the frozen street. I need to think about it, Garrett said finally. Give me until tonight. Come back after dark. I'll have an answer then. Tonight might be too late, Gideon said. It's all I can offer. Garrett's voice was firm. You've put me in an impossible position. The least you can do is give me time to decide if I'm willing to die for it. Evelyn wanted to argue, but Gideon touched her arm. Tonight, he agreed. We'll come to the back door. Knock 3 times. Garrett nodded. Now go, before Hollis decides to come back and ask more questions. They left through the front, trying to look casual. Evelyn kept her head down, but she could feel eyes on them. People were watching. Word was already spreading that Vale was back in town. We need to get off the street, Gideon muttered. Too exposed. They made it back to the livery without incident. Walker was nowhere to be seen, so they climbed the stairs to their room and locked themselves inside. Evelyn paced while Gideon stood watch at the window. He's not going to help, she said. You saw how scared he was. Maybe. Maybe not. Gideon didn't turn from the window. Fear makes people unpredictable. Sometimes it makes them run. Sometimes it makes them fight. And if he runs? Then we move on to the next name. We don't stop. The hours crawled by. Evelyn tried to rest but couldn't. Every sound from the street made her jump. Every footstep on the stairs had her reaching for the knife Gideon had given her. Finally, as the sun started to set, Gideon moved away from the window. Time to go. They waited until full dark, then slipped out through the back of the stable. The town was loud now, the saloon in full swing, miners off shift and drowning their exhaustion in whiskey. Perfect cover. They circled around to the back of the mercantile and found the rear entrance. Gideon knocked 3 times. Waited. Nothing. He knocked again. Still nothing. Something's wrong, Evelyn whispered. Gideon tried the door. It swung open, unlocked. The back room was dark. Too dark. Gideon drew his gun and stepped inside, and Evelyn followed close behind. Garrett? Gideon called softly. No answer. They moved through the storeroom toward the front of the shop. Evelyn's heart was pounding so loud she was sure it would give them away. The front room was empty, but there was a lamp burning low on the counter, and next to it, a piece of paper. Evelyn grabbed it and held it up to the light. The handwriting was shaky but legible. They came asking about you. I told them nothing, but they didn't believe me. I'm leaving tonight. Can't help you. I'm sorry. There's a woman in Bellwood, Catherine Webb, schoolteacher. She might be braver than me. That was it. No signature, nothing else. Damn it, Gideon breathed. Evelyn crumpled the note in her fist. We scared him off. Or Hollis did. Gideon moved to the front window and peered through a gap in the curtains. Either way, we can't stay here. If Garrett's running, Hollis is going to start asking why. So we go to Bellwood. Not yet. It's 40 miles and we'd have to ride through the night. He turned back to her. We hole up in the livery until morning, then we leave at first light. Quiet and careful. They made it back to the stable without being seen. Walker still wasn't around, which was both good and bad. Good because he couldn't ask questions. Bad because it meant they had no idea if anyone had been snooping around. Gideon checked the room thoroughly, then wedged the chair under the door again. Get some sleep if you can. I'll keep watch. Gideon? Sleep, he said. That's an order. Evelyn lay down fully clothed, the journal still tucked against her chest. She didn't think she'd be able to sleep, but exhaustion dragged her under within minutes. She woke to Gideon's hand over her mouth. Her eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black. Gideon's face was inches from hers, barely visible. Quiet, he breathed. Someone's downstairs. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She nodded, and Gideon removed his hand, helped her sit up slowly, carefully, trying not to make the bed creak. From below came the sound of voices, low, urgent, and then footsteps on the stairs. Gideon grabbed his rifle and positioned himself beside the door, motioned for Evelyn to get behind the bed. The footsteps stopped outside their room. A pause. Then someone tried the handle. The chair held. Vale? The voice was Hollis's. I know you're in there. Open up. Gideon didn't answer. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard, Hollis continued. But either way, you're coming with me. Got some questions need answering. Ask them out there, Gideon said. Don't think so. A heavy thud as someone threw their weight against the door. The chair scraped but held. You've been making trouble, Vale. Asking about things that ain't your business. Mr. Thornhill don't appreciate that. Another thud. The chair legs splintered. Window, Gideon hissed to Evelyn. Go, now. Evelyn scrambled to the window and shoved it open, looked down. It was a 12-foot drop to the alley below. She hesitated. The door exploded inward. The chair flew across the room. Hollis came through first, gun drawn, his deputy right behind him. Gideon fired. The shot was deafening in the small space. The deputy went down screaming, clutching his leg. Hollis dove behind the washstand and returned fire. Wood splintered above Evelyn's head. Go! Gideon roared. Evelyn went, threw herself out the window and fell. She hit the ground hard, her ankle twisting, pain shooting up her leg. Rolled to her feet anyway and ran. Behind her, more gunshots, shouting. The whole town would be awake now. She ran through the alley, her ankles screaming with every step. Emerged onto a side street and nearly collided with a man coming out of a building. He grabbed for her, but she twisted away, drew the knife Gideon had given her, and slashed. The man yelped and let go. Evelyn kept running. Behind her, she could hear pursuit. Multiple people now. The whole damn town was after her. She cut between buildings, vaulted a fence, nearly fell again when her ankle gave out. Kept going anyway because stopping meant dying. A hand grabbed her collar and yanked her into a doorway. She drove her elbow back hard, heard a grunt, and then, "Stop!" Gideon's voice. "It's me!" She spun. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, and his coat was torn, but he was alive. He grabbed her hand and pulled her through the door into what looked like an abandoned shop. "Are you hit?" he asked, checking her over quickly. "My ankle. I'm fine. Are you?" "Fine." He moved to the window and looked out. "They're searching the streets. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they think to check the empty buildings." The stable. The horse. Gone. Had to leave him. Gideon's jaw was tight. "We go on foot. Out the back. Through the woods. Put as much distance between us and this town as we can before sunrise." "Gideon, I can barely walk." He looked at her ankle, then back at her face. Something hard and determined settled in his expression. "Then I'll carry you. But we're not getting caught. Not here. Not like this." They slipped out the back and into the forest beyond the town. Evelyn leaned heavily on Gideon, every step agony, but she didn't slow down. Behind them, lanterns bobbed through the streets, men shouting, dogs barking. The hunt was on. They walked through the night, moving as fast as Evelyn's ankle would allow. Gideon half carried her most of the way, his arm around her waist, taking her weight. They didn't talk, just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. When dawn broke, they were miles from Coldwater, deep in the pine forest. Evelyn collapsed against a tree, gasping. "Can't," she managed. "Can't keep going." Gideon knelt beside her and examined her ankle. It was swollen to twice its normal size, already turning purple. "It's not broken," he said, "but you can't walk on it. Not far, anyway." "So what do we do?" He looked back the way they'd come. "They'll be tracking us. Hollis isn't going to let this go. We need to find somewhere to hide. Wait them out." "Where?" "I know a place. Old trapper's cabin about 2 miles north. Hasn't been used in years, but the structure was solid last I saw it." He helped her up. "Can you make it 2 more miles?" Evelyn's whole body hurt. Her ankle throbbed with every heartbeat. She was exhausted and terrified and wanted nothing more than to lie down and give up. Instead, she nodded. "I can make it." They reached the cabin just as the sun climbed above the tree line. It was barely standing, roof sagging, one wall half collapsed, but it had 4 walls and a door that closed. Gideon got Evelyn inside and settled her in the corner farthest from the door. "Stay here. Don't move. Don't make noise." He checked his rifle. "I'm going to cover our tracks. Make it harder for them to follow." "And if they find us anyway?" Gideon looked at her. His eyes were hard as stone. "Then I stop them. Whatever it takes." He left. Evelyn sat in the dim cabin and pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the journal beneath her shirt. Still there, still safe. They'd lost everything else. The horse, their supplies, any chance of going back to Coldwater. But they still had the evidence. They still had a chance. She just hoped it would be enough. Gideon came back an hour later. His hands were scraped raw and there was mud streaked across his face, but his expression was grim satisfaction. "Covered the last half mile," he said, dropping down beside her. "Led the trail in 3 different directions. Should buy us some time." "How much time?" "Day, maybe 2 if we're lucky." He pulled out his canteen and handed it to her. "Drink. Then we need to talk about what comes next." Evelyn drank. The water was cold and tasted like metal, but it helped clear her head. "Bellwood," she said. "We go to Bellwood and find Catherine Webb." Eventually, Gideon took the canteen back and drank deeply. "But not yet. Your ankle needs time to heal and we need supplies, food, ammunition, another horse if we can manage it." "How are we supposed to get any of that? We left everything behind." "There's a settlement about 15 miles east. Not much more than a trading post, but the man who runs it owes me a favor." Gideon wiped his mouth. "We wait here 2 days. Let your ankle stabilize. Then we move at night, stick to the woods, and hope Hollis's men are too busy searching Coldwater to notice we've gone in a different direction." 2 days trapped in a crumbling cabin with no food and limited water, Evelyn's stomach was already gnawing at itself. "What do we eat in the meantime?" "I'll hunt. There's a creek nearby with trout, and I saw rabbit tracks." He stood and moved to the door. You rest. Don't put weight on that ankle unless you absolutely have to. He was gone before she could argue. The hours crawled by. Evelyn dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Birds in the trees, wind rattling the loose boards. Once, voices in the distance that made her freeze until they faded away. Gideon returned at dusk with 2 rabbits and a handful of wild onions. He built a tiny fire in the old hearth, carefully managing the smoke, and they ate in silence. The meat was tough and underseasoned, but Evelyn devoured every bite. Tell me about Bellwood, she said when they'd finished. What's it like? Gideon stared into the fire. Bigger than Coldwater, maybe 300 people. Mining town mostly, but Thornhill's got his fingers in everything. The bank, the land office, the hotel. He doesn't live there, too small for a man like him, but he owns it just the same. And Catherine Webb, the school teacher, you think she'll talk to us? If she's still alive. Gideon's voice was flat. Your father's notes are 2 years old. A lot can happen in 2 years. You're not exactly radiating optimism. I'm being realistic. He looked at her. We got run out of Coldwater in less than 12 hours. Nearly got killed in the process. And that was just trying to talk to one man. You think Bellwood's going to be any easier? No, Evelyn said quietly. But what choice do we have? Give up? Go back to the mountain and pretend none of this matters? Would that be so bad? The question caught her off guard. She studied his face in the firelight, trying to read his expression. You want to quit? I want you to understand what we're risking. Gideon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We go to Bellwood, we're walking into Thornhill's territory. His men, his rules. And this time they won't just try to scare us off. They'll kill us. No warning, no second chance. Is that journal worth dying for? Evelyn's hand moved to her chest, pressing against the oilcloth bundle beneath her shirt. My father thought it was. Your father's dead. The words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn felt something hot and sharp twist in her chest. I know he's dead. I was there when they brought his body back, when they told me it was an accident and I should just accept it and move on. Her voice rose. I know what it cost him, and I know what it'll cost us. But if we don't try, if we just give up and hide, then he died for nothing. All those families lost everything for nothing. Thornhill wins and keeps winning, and nothing ever changes. Sometimes nothing changes anyway, Gideon said. Sometimes you fight with everything you've got, and you still lose. Then at least we lose fighting. Evelyn met his eyes. I'm going to Bellwood, with or without you. I'll crawl there on my hands and knees if I have to, but I'm going. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head, something that might have been a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. That a compliment? It's an observation. He stood and kicked dirt over the fire. Get some sleep. We've got a long walk ahead of us. The next 2 days passed in a haze of pain and waiting. Evelyn's ankle improved slowly, the swelling going down enough that she could put weight on it without wanting to scream. Gideon disappeared for hours at a time, returning with food and water, and once, inexplicably, a pair of worn boots that actually fit her better than the ones she'd been wearing. Where did these come from? She asked. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. On the 3rd night, they left the cabin. Evelyn's ankle throbbed with every step, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. Gideon set a brutal pace, pushing through the darkness with the confidence of a man who knew these woods like his own skin. They reached the trading post just before dawn. It was exactly what Gideon had described, barely more than a shack with a corral out back and a hand-painted sign that read McAllister's. No lights showed in the windows. Wait here, Gideon said. He approached the door and knocked, not loud, but in a specific pattern. 3 quick raps. Pause. 2 more. After a minute, the door cracked open. A man peered out, holding a lantern. He was tall and rangy, with a gray beard that hung to his chest. Vale, the man's voice was gravelly. Figured you were dead. Not yet. Gideon gestured back toward Evelyn. Need supplies. And discretion. McAllister's eyes narrowed. What kind of trouble you in? The permanent kind. Thornhill? His sheriff, anyway. McAllister swore softly and opened the door wider. Get inside. Both of you. The interior of the trading post was cramped and cluttered with goods. Furs hung from the rafters, and shelves lined every wall, packed with everything from ammunition to canned beans. McAllister set the lantern on a counter and studied them both. "You look like hell," he said to Gideon. Then to Evelyn, "And you look like you've been through worse. What happened?" "Long story," Gideon said. "Short version is we need food, ammunition, and a horse if you've got one to spare. I can pay." "With what? You came down from that mountain with nothing but the clothes on your back, near as I can tell." Gideon hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, Evelyn saw a gold pocket watch. Ornate, expensive looking. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "Had it a long time," but Gideon handed it to McAllister. "Should be worth enough for what we need." McAllister examined the watch, turning it over in his hands. "This is quality work. You sure you want to trade it?" "I'm sure." "All right." McAllister pocketed the watch. "I'll get you sorted. But Vale, you need to tell me what you're into. If Thornhill's men come asking questions, I need to know what to say." "Tell them nothing," Gideon said. "Tell them you haven't seen me in years." "They won't believe that." "Then tell them whatever keeps you breathing. I'm not asking you to get killed on my account." McAllister sighed and moved to start gathering supplies. While he worked, Evelyn limped to a stool and sat down heavily. Her ankle was on fire, and exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. "You all right?" Gideon asked quietly. "No, but I'll manage." He crouched beside her and checked her ankle through the boot. "It's holding together. But you need rest. Real rest, not just hiding in abandoned buildings." "Can't rest yet." "I know." He stood. "But when this is over, if this is ever over," she corrected. "When?" he insisted. "When this is over, first thing we do is sleep for a week straight." Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. "Deal." McAllister came back with 2 full packs and a rifle. "Best I can do on short notice. Got food for a week, ammunition, some medical supplies. The horse is out back, brown mare, 8 years old. She's sound, just not fast." "She doesn't need to be fast," Gideon said. "Just reliable." "What about payment?" Evelyn asked. "That watch can't be worth all this." "Consider the difference a gift." McAllister's expression was serious. "Whatever you're doing, Vale, I hope it's worth it. Thornhill's got a long reach and a longer memory." "I know." Gideon shouldered one of the packs. "Thanks, McAllister. I won't forget this. Just stay alive long enough to make it matter." They left as the sun was rising, Evelyn riding the mare while Gideon walked alongside. The horse was exactly as advertised, steady, patient, unbothered by the rough terrain. By mid-morning, they'd put 10 miles between themselves and the trading post, and Gideon finally allowed them to stop and rest. "How far to Bellwood?" Evelyn asked. 2 days at this pace, maybe 3. He checked the supplies McAllister had packed. "We'll stay off the main roads. Move at night when we can. The closer we get, the more careful we need to be." "You really think Thornhill's men are looking for us?" "I think Hollis sent word the second we escaped Coldwater. And I think Thornhill doesn't like loose ends." Gideon pulled out a map and spread it on the ground. "We come in from the east, through the mining camps. More people, easier to blend in. We find Catherine Webb, feel her out the same way we tried with Garrett. If she's willing to help, we bring her into the fold. If not, we keep going," Evelyn finished. "Find someone who will." "Right." He folded the map. "But we have to be smart. No more walking into sheriffs. No more taking chances we don't have to." They traveled for 2 more days, moving through forest and hill country, avoiding roads and settlements. At night they camped without fire, eating cold food and sleeping in shifts. Evelyn's ankle healed enough that she could walk again, though it still ached with every step. On the 3rd day, Bellwood came into view. It was bigger than Coldwater, just like Gideon had said. A sprawling collection of buildings clustered around a central square, with mining operations visible on the hills beyond. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, and even from a distance Evelyn could hear the sounds of industry, hammers on metal, wagon wheels on cobblestone, men shouting orders. "We wait until dark," Gideon said. "Come in quiet. Find the school first. Get eyes on Webb. Then we decide how to approach." They made camp in a stand of trees overlooking the town and waited for sunset. Evelyn cleaned her knife and checked the journal for the 100th time, making sure it was still secure. Her hands were shaking. Nervous? Gideon asked. Terrified, she admitted. Good. Means you're thinking straight. He checked his rifle, then his pistol. Stay close to me. If something goes wrong, you run. You don't fight, you don't try to help me, you just run. Get to Denver and find Marshall Cross. Promise me. I'm not leaving you behind. Promise me, Evelyn. She met his eyes, saw the determination there, and something else. Something that made her chest tight. I promise. When darkness fell, they moved into town. They came in through the mining district, where exhausted workers were stumbling home and no one paid attention to two more dusty travelers. The school was easy to find, a white building near the center of town with a bell tower and a small yard. No lights showed in the windows. She might not live here, Gideon murmured. Teachers sometimes board with families. So we ask around. Carefully. They found a saloon 2 blocks away and went inside. It was crowded and loud, miners drinking away their wages. No one looked twice at them. Gideon bought 2 beers and they found a corner table where they could watch the room. We listen, he said. Pick up what we can. Don't ask direct questions. It took an hour, but eventually Evelyn heard someone mention Webb. 2 men at the bar, talking about some dispute over school funding. That school teacher's always making noise, one of them said. Wants new books, new desks, like money grows on trees. She's all right, the other replied. Better than the last one. At least she shows up sober. Where's she live these days? Still at the boarding house? Nah, she moved, got a little place on Cedar Street, that blue house near the creek. Evelyn caught Gideon's eye. He nodded slightly. They finished their beers and left. Cedar Street was on the east side of town, quieter than the center. The blue house was small but well-maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and a neat picket fence. A single lamp burned in the front window. Someone's home, Evelyn whispered. Gideon studied the house, the street, the neighboring buildings. We go to the back door. Less visible. You do the talking this time. Woman approaching a woman is less threatening. They circled around through an alley and came up behind the house. Gideon positioned himself where he could see both the back door and the street, then nodded to Evelyn. She knocked. 3 soft raps. Footsteps inside. The door cracked open and a woman peered out. She was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and intelligent, wary eyes. Can I help you? Her voice was cautious. Catherine Webb, Evelyn asked. Who's asking? My name is Evelyn Harrow. My father was Richard Harrow. I think you knew him. Catherine's expression changed instantly. Fear flashed across her face and she started to close the door. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. Evelyn put her hand on the door. I need 5 minutes, that's all. Just 5 minutes to explain why I'm here. I can't help you. I'm sorry, but I can't. You witnessed the Blackstone collapse. You saw what really happened. Catherine went very still. How do you know about that? My father's journal. He documented everything. Evelyn pulled it from her shirt and held it up. Including your testimony. He trusted you. Now I'm asking you to trust me. Catherine looked at the journal, at Evelyn's face, at Gideon standing in the shadows. You're the ones they're looking for, the ones who caused trouble in Coldwater. We didn't cause trouble, Gideon said quietly. We just asked questions. Questions that got you hunted. Catherine's voice was sharp. Do you have any idea what you've done? Thornhill knows about you now. He's got men looking everywhere. And if they find you here, if they connect you to me, she shook her head. You need to leave, now. Not until you hear what I have to say, Evelyn said. Please, my father died gathering this evidence. The least you can do is look at it. Catherine hesitated. Then, against what was clearly her better judgment, she stepped back and opened the door wider. 5 minutes, that's all you get. They went inside. The house was small but comfortable, books lining every wall. Catherine led them to a kitchen table and lit another lamp. Show me, she said. Evelyn opened the journal to the pages about Blackstone. Catherine read in silence, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished, she sat back and pressed her hands to her mouth. He got it all, she whispered. Every detail. Even the names of the inspectors who took bribes. You told him this? Evelyn asked. I told him what I saw. I was buying supplies that day right across from the mine. I saw Thornhill arguing with the foreman. Saw him refuse to pay for proper timber supports. Saw him threaten to fire anyone who complained. Her voice shook. Then 2 days later, the collapse. 16 men buried alive. And Thornhill stood there during the funerals, looking appropriately sad, and no one said a word about what he'd done. Why didn't you speak up? Gideon's question wasn't accusatory, just curious. Because I wanted to live. Catherine's laugh was bitter. I'm a single woman in a mining town. I have no family, no protection. If I testified against Thornhill, I would have disappeared, just like your father did. Evelyn's throat tightened. He didn't disappear, he was murdered. I know. Catherine met her eyes. Everyone knows. They just won't say it out loud. Then help me say it. Evelyn leaned forward. Help me make people hear the truth. You're not alone anymore. There are others willing to stand up. We just need to bring them together. Others. Catherine shook her head. You mean the people on this list? Half of them are dead, Evelyn. And the ones who aren't are too scared to fight back. I'm too scared to fight back. Fear's what keeps him in power, Gideon said. As long as everyone's too scared to act, nothing changes. And if we act and fail, we die. That's not courage. It's suicide. What about those 16 miners? Evelyn asked quietly. What about their families? Don't they deserve justice? Justice. Catherine stood and paced to the window, stared out at the dark street. You think justice exists for people like us, against a man like Thornhill? I think it exists if we fight for it. Catherine was silent for a long time. When she turned back, there were tears on her face. Even if I wanted to help, and I'm not saying I do, what could I possibly do? Testify? In front of who? Thornhill owns the judges, owns the sheriffs. There's no court that would convict him. Then we take it public, Evelyn said. We gather everyone he's hurt, everyone with a story, and we make so much noise that even his money can't silence us all. That's insane. Maybe, Evelyn stood, but it's better than doing nothing. It's better than letting him keep destroying lives while we all hide and pretend we don't see it. Catherine wiped her eyes, looked at the journal lying open on the table. Your father was a good man. Naive, maybe, but good. He really believed the truth mattered. It does matter. Does it? Or does power matter more? Catherine sighed. I need to think about this. I need time. We don't have much time, Gideon said. Thornhill's men are looking for us. Sooner or later they'll find us, and when they do, I know what happens when they find you. Catherine's voice was sharp. I'm not an idiot, but you're asking me to risk everything. My job, my home, my life. The least you can give me is a day to decide. Where are you staying? She asked Evelyn. We're not. We're camping outside town. That's not safe. Thornhill's men patrol at night. Catherine hesitated, then said, There's a shed behind the school. It's where we store supplies. The lock's broken. You can sleep there tonight. Come back tomorrow after dark and I'll have an answer. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. They thanked her and left the way they came, circling through alleys until they found the school. The shed was exactly where Catherine said it would be, and the lock was indeed broken. Inside were stacks of books, writing slates, and old desks. They made a nest in the corner and settled in. Gideon took first watch while Evelyn tried to sleep. You think she'll help? Evelyn asked into the darkness. I think she's terrified, and I think terrified people are unpredictable. Gideon's voice was quiet. But I also think she wants to help. Whether she's brave enough to actually do it? He trailed off. We'll find out tomorrow. Yeah. A pause. Evelyn? If this goes bad, if we don't make it out of Bellwood, I want you to know something. She opened her eyes. Couldn't see him in the darkness, but she could feel his presence. What? These last few months, up on the mountain, teaching you, training you, having you there. He stopped, started again. I stopped being alone, and that was good. Better than I thought it would be. Evelyn's chest felt tight. Gideon, get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hell one way or another. She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that she felt the same, that somewhere between learning to skin rabbits and learning to fight, she'd stopped seeing him as just the man who'd saved her. But the words wouldn't come, so she just closed her eyes and listened to his breathing and hoped they'd both survive long enough to have the conversation later. When she finally slept, she dreamed of fire and blood, and her father's journal burning to ash in her hands. She woke to shouting. Evelyn's eyes snapped open. Gray morning light filtered through cracks in the shed walls, and outside voices were barking orders. Boots on gravel, the jangle of harnesses. Gideon was already at the door, peering through a gap. "Town square," he muttered. "Something's happening." They crept to the window. From their vantage point behind the school, they could see the main square filling with people, not just miners heading to work. Everyone. Shopkeepers, women with children, old men who rarely left their porches, all converging on the square like they'd been summoned. And in the center, on a hastily constructed platform, stood Marcus Thornhill. Evelyn had never seen him in person, but she knew him instantly. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit that made everyone around him look like beggars. His hair was silver at the temples, his face handsome in a cold, calculated way. He stood with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. Beside him stood Sheriff Hollis. "They found us," Evelyn whispered. "Not yet," Gideon said. "But they're looking. This is a show. He's making a point." Thornhill raised his hands and the crowd quieted. His voice carried across the square, smooth and cultured. "Good people of Bellwood, thank you for gathering on such short notice. I know you're eager to get to your day's work, so I'll be brief. As many of you know, there have been some disturbances in the territory. Troublemakers spreading lies and causing panic. Sheriff Hollis has informed me that these individuals may be headed our way." He paused, letting the words sink in. People shifted nervously. "These are dangerous people," Thornhill continued. "Criminals and agitators who would seek to undermine everything we've built here. They prey on good, honest folk with wild accusations and fabricated evidence. They want to destroy the prosperity and order that has made this territory great." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. Every word was a lie wrapped in silk. "I'm offering a reward," Thornhill said. $500 for information leading to their capture. These fugitives are a man and a woman traveling together. The man goes by Vale. Some of you may remember him from his time in our mining camps. The woman is unknown, but she's been asking questions about water rights and land claims. A ripple went through the crowd. People turned to their neighbors, whispering. "If you see them, do not approach. They are armed and dangerous. Report directly to Sheriff Hollis or his deputies. Together, we will keep Bellwood safe from those who would tear it down." Thornhill smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf. "Now go about your business, and remember, we take care of our own here. We protect what's ours." The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, everyone's still talking. Evelyn saw the calculation in their eyes. $500 was more money than most of these people would see in a year. "We need to leave," Gideon said. "Right now, before someone—" The shed door burst open. Catherine Webb stood there, breathing hard, her face pale. "They're searching houses," she said, "starting at the edge of town and working inward. You have maybe an hour before they get here." "Where can we go?" Evelyn asked. "Nowhere. Not in town." Catherine's hands were shaking. "But I know someone, a miner named Jack Reeves. He lost his brother in the Blackstone collapse. He lives up in the camps, about 2 miles north." "If anyone would hide you, it's him." "You sure about that?" Gideon asked. "No, but it's all I've got." Catherine pulled a scrap of paper from her pocket. "This is how to find his cabin. Go now, before the search parties spread out." "What about you?" Evelyn grabbed her arm. "If they find out you helped us, then I'll deal with it." Catherine's voice was steadier now, determined. "Your father was right about Thornhill, and I've spent 2 years hating myself for being too scared to say so. Maybe it's time I stopped being a coward." "This isn't cowardice," Evelyn said. "This is survival." "Is there a difference anymore?" Catherine pressed the paper into Evelyn's hand. "Go. I'll find you at Reeves's cabin tonight. If I can help, I will. If I can't—" She didn't finish the sentence. They left through the back, moving fast through alleys and between buildings. Behind them, they could hear doors being kicked in, men shouting. The search had begun. They made it to the edge of town and into the hills beyond. The mining camps were scattered across the slopes like barnacles, rough shacks and tents where the men who couldn't afford town lodgings lived. The air smelled like sulfur and sweat. Finding Reeves's cabin took an hour of navigating narrow paths and avoiding other miners. When they finally located it, a timber structure barely bigger than the shed they'd slept in, Gideon knocked hard. The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s with burned scars covering half his face. He looked at them with one good eye and started to close the door. "Wait," Evelyn said quickly. "Catherine Webb sent us. She said you might help." Reeves stopped. "Catherine sent you?" "Yes. We're the ones Thornhill's looking for." "I know who you are. Everyone knows." He studied them both. "Why would I risk my neck for strangers?" "Because we have proof," Evelyn said. "Proof that your brother didn't die in an accident. Proof that Thornhill cut costs and got 16 men killed. Proof that can bring him down." Something dark and terrible flickered in Reeves's eye. "Show me." They went inside. The cabin was spare and clean, with a single cot and a table. Evelyn laid out the journal and showed him the pages about Blackstone. Reeves read with his jaw clenched so tight Evelyn could hear his teeth grinding. "My brother was 23, he said finally. Had a wife. Baby on the way. He knew those supports were bad, told the foreman, got laughed at. Then 3 days later, his voice broke. I dug him out myself, took 6 hours to find his body." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said quietly. "Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't feed his widow." Reeves looked up at her. "But justice might. What do you need?" "A place to hide," Gideon said. "And when the time comes, someone willing to stand up and tell the truth. I'll do more than that." Reeves closed the journal carefully. "You want to bring down Thornhill? I'll help you do it. And I know others who will too. Men who lost friends in that collapse. Families who lost everything to his land grabs." He stood. "Stay here. Keep quiet. I'll spread the word." He left before they could argue. "You trust him?" Evelyn asked Gideon. "Don't have much choice." Gideon moved to the window and watched Reeves disappear down the path. "But yeah, I think I do. Man who dug his brother out of a collapsed mine doesn't forget. Doesn't forgive." They waited. Hours dragged by. Evelyn paced while Gideon kept watch, his rifle across his knees. Every sound made her jump, footsteps outside, voices in the distance, the wind rattling the door. As the sun started to set, Reeves returned. He wasn't alone. 4 men came with him, all miners, all carrying the same hard, angry expressions. "This is what I could gather on short notice," Reeves said. "There's more, dozens more. But they're scared. Need something to push them over the edge." "What do you suggest?" Gideon asked. "Thornhill's holding a ceremony tomorrow," one of the other miners said. His name was Tom, and he had a scar across his throat that made his voice raspy. "Big celebration. He's signing papers to take control of the water rights for the whole valley. Going to make a speech about progress and prosperity. Whole town will be there." "That's our moment," Reeves said. "We show up. All of us. Everyone he's hurt. And we make him answer for what he's done." "In front of the whole town?" Evelyn's heart was pounding. "He'll have guards. Thornhill won't just let us—" "No, he won't," Reeves interrupted, "which is why we need to be smart about it. We don't go in swinging. We go in loud. We make a scene, get people's attention, then we show them proof." He tapped the journal. "Let the town decide who's telling the truth." "The town's scared of him," Gideon said. "They'll side with power every time." "Maybe," Tom rasped. "Or maybe they're tired of being scared. Way I see it, we got nothing left to lose. Thornhill's already taken everything." The other miners nodded. These were men who'd lost brothers, friends, livelihoods, men who'd been ground down and left with nothing but rage. Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. 3 quick raps. Everyone went silent. Gideon raised his rifle. "It's me," came Catherine's voice. "Let me in." Reeves opened the door. Catherine stumbled inside, breathing hard. Her dress was torn, and there was a bruise forming on her cheek. "What happened?" Evelyn grabbed her. "They came to my house, 2 of Hollis's deputies, started asking questions about strangers I might have seen." Catherine's voice shook. "I told them nothing, but they didn't believe me. They searched the place, tore it apart, found some of your father's letters I'd kept. They know I was in contact with him." "Did they arrest you?" "Not yet. But they're watching my house. I can't go back." She looked around at the assembled miners, then at Evelyn. Whatever you're planning, I'm in. I'm done hiding. We're going to crash Thornhill's ceremony tomorrow, Reeves said. Expose him in front of the whole town. That's suicide, Catherine said flatly. Probably. But it's the only play we've got. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened, wincing at the pain in her ribs. All right, then we do it properly. Thornhill's a showman. He controls the narrative because he controls the stage. So we take the stage from him. How? Evelyn asked. The ceremony's at noon in the square. He'll be on that platform, surrounded by his men, signing those papers. The whole town watching like it's a coronation. Catherine's eyes were sharp now, calculating. What if someone interrupts? Someone he can't just silence or drag away? Someone who has the town's attention. Like who? Tom asked. Catherine looked at Evelyn. Like the daughter of the man he murdered. Standing up there, reading his crimes out loud for everyone to hear. The cabin went silent. They'll kill her before she gets 3 words out, Gideon said. Not if we do it right. Not if we create enough chaos that his guards don't know where to look first. Catherine turned to the miners. How many people can you gather by tomorrow? Maybe 20, Reeves said. Men who lost people in Blackstone. Families from the water diversions. Won't be armed. We can't risk an outright fight, but we can make noise. That's enough. We spread through the crowd. When Thornhill starts his speech, we start ours. Multiple voices, all shouting the truth. His guards can't silence everyone at once. Catherine looked back at Evelyn. And while they're distracted, you get on that platform and you read from the journal. Make them hear it. Make them see what he is. And if it doesn't work? Evelyn's voice was quiet. If they just drag me off that stage and shoot me? Then at least you fought back, Catherine said. At least you tried. Gideon stood and moved to the window, stared out at the darkening hills. There's got to be another way. Something that doesn't end with Evelyn dead. There isn't, Evelyn said. She surprised herself with how steady her voice was. Catherine's right. This is the only way. My father spent 2 years building this case, and he died for it. If I don't use it now, if I let fear stop me, then what was it all for? Gideon turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. You do this, there's no taking it back. The second you step on that platform, Thornhill will come for you with everything he's got. I know. You'll be painting a target on your back that'll never go away. I know that too. She moved to stand in front of him. But I'm tired of running, Gideon. I'm tired of hiding and hoping someone else will fix this. It ends tomorrow, one way or another. He searched her face, looking for doubt, maybe, or fear. He wouldn't find either. Somewhere between the mountain and here, between learning to survive and learning to fight, the fear had burned away. What was left was harder, sharper. All right, he said finally. Then we do it your way, but I'm going on that platform with you. You don't do this alone. Gideon, that's not up for debate. His voice was iron. We started this together. We finish it together. The miners spent the night spreading word through the camps. By dawn, they had commitments from 17 families. Not an army, but enough bodies to create confusion, enough voices to be heard. They gathered in Reeves's cabin as the sun climbed, miners with scarred hands and bitter faces, women who'd lost husbands and sons, even a few children old enough to understand what was at stake. Catherine briefed them on the plan while Evelyn memorized the key passages from her father's journal. The water diversions on Fuller Creek, she recited, the falsified inspections at Blackstone, the bribed land office clerks in 3 counties, the families bankrupted and driven off their property, all of it documented, all of it traceable to Thornhill. You sure you can remember it all? Reeves asked. I've been reading this journal every day for 6 months. I could recite it in my sleep. Gideon checked his rifle for the 10th time. He'd barely spoken all morning, and the tension radiating from him was palpable. Evelyn touched his arm. I'll be all right, she said quietly. You don't know that. Neither do you, so we might as well act like it'll work. At 11 o'clock, they moved into position. The miners and families filtered into town separately, blending with the crowds gathering for the ceremony. Evelyn, Gideon, and Catherine approached from the east, keeping to back streets. The square was already packed. Hundreds of people pressed shoulder to shoulder, all facing the platform where Thornhill stood looking like a king, surveying his subjects. Sheriff Hollis flanked him on one side, and on the other stood a man in a suit, probably a lawyer or land office official, there to make the signing look legitimate. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. The journal was tucked inside her shirt, warm against her skin. Gideon's hand found hers and squeezed once. "When I give the signal," Catherine whispered, "that's when we move. Get as close to the platform as you can. The miners will start shouting. Use the chaos." Thornhill raised his hands and the crowd quieted. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying across the square. "Today marks a new chapter for our community. With the signing of these papers, we secure the water rights that will ensure prosperity for generations to come. No more worrying about drought or shortage. We control our own destiny." "At what cost?" The shout came from the back of the crowd. Tom, his raspy voice cutting through. "How many families you destroy to get those rights?" People turned, murmured. Thornhill's expression didn't change, but Evelyn saw Hollis's hand move to his gun. "How many men died in Blackstone because you wouldn't pay for proper supports?" Another voice, from the left. Reeves this time. More murmuring. The crowd was shifting, uncertain. "These are the lies I warned you about," Thornhill said smoothly. "Agitators trying to sow discord. Sheriff, remove those men." "What about Fuller Creek?" A woman's voice now. "My family lost everything when you diverted the water. Where's our prosperity?" The deputies started pushing through the crowd, but more voices were rising. All across the square, people were shouting, questions, accusations. The careful order of the ceremony was fracturing. "Now," Catherine hissed. They moved. Evelyn and Gideon pushed through the crowd, using their elbows, forcing their way toward the platform. People saw them coming and some recognized them. She heard someone yell, "That's them! The fugitives!" But the chaos was spreading too fast for anyone to coordinate a response. They reached the platform steps. A deputy tried to block them, but Gideon hit him hard enough to drop him. They took the stairs two at a time. Thornhill saw them and his mask slipped. For one perfect second, Evelyn saw real fear in his eyes. "Get them off my stage!" he snarled at Hollis. Hollis drew his gun, but Gideon already had his rifle up. "I wouldn't," Gideon said calmly. The square had gone dead silent, everyone staring at the platform where Evelyn stood face to face with Marcus Thornhill. She pulled out the journal, held it up so everyone could see. "My name is Evelyn Harrow," she said. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger. "My father was Richard Harrow. He spent 2 years investigating Marcus Thornhill, and what he found got him killed." "This is absurd," Thornhill said, but his voice had lost its polish. "Sheriff, arrest these people." "Let her speak," someone in the crowd shouted. Others took up the cry. "Let her speak." Hollis looked uncertain. His gun was still drawn, but he wasn't aiming it. Evelyn opened the journal. Fuller Creek Water Diversion, March 1873. Marcus Thornhill bribed Land Office Clerk James Morrison to falsify boundaries, allowing water to be redirected to Thornhill properties. 3 downstream ranches lost their water supply: the Hendersons, the Pratts, and the Coles. All 3 families bankrupt within 6 months. She looked up at the crowd, saw people leaning in, listening. Blackstone Mine collapse, July 1874. Thornhill cut costs by using inferior timber for tunnel supports. Mine Inspector Gregory Walsh was paid $200 to falsify his safety report. 16 men died when the tunnel collapsed. She looked directly at Thornhill. Jack Reeves's brother was one of them, Tom Garrett's cousin, Sarah Mitchell's husband. Names had power. She saw it ripple through the crowd as people recognized victims, remembered losses. "This journal contains documentation of 47 separate crimes," Evelyn continued. "Fraud, bribery, theft, negligent homicide, all traceable to this man." She pointed at Thornhill. "He's built an empire on the backs of broken families, and he's gotten away with it because he bought the sheriffs and the judges and the land offices, because he bet that we'd all be too scared to fight back." Lies. Thornhill's composure was cracking. "These are fabrications. Where's your proof?" "Right here." Evelyn held up the journal. "Names, dates, documented evidence, witness testimonies, everything you tried to bury. Then show it to a judge. Follow proper channels." Thornhill's eyes were wild now. You can't just stand here and accuse. The judges are yours, Evelyn cut him off. The sheriffs are yours. The proper channels are all corrupted, so I'm showing it to them. She gestured to the crowd. The people you've been stealing from. Let them decide. For a long moment, nobody moved. The square was frozen, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Then Catherine Webb stepped onto the platform. I was there, she said clearly. I witnessed the Blackstone collapse. I saw Thornhill refuse to pay for proper supports. I told Richard Harrow everything, and he wrote it down. Every word in that journal about Blackstone is true. Another figure pushed through the crowd. An old man Evelyn didn't recognize. I'm Samuel Pratt. Lost my ranch to the Fuller Creek diversion. Couldn't prove it at the time, but everything this girl just said is exactly what happened. More people were moving forward now, coming out of the crowd, speaking up. A miner who'd worked at Blackstone. A woman whose family had been driven off their land. A shopkeeper who'd been bankrupted by sudden loan changes. One voice became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became a chorus. Thornhill backed up, looking for an escape route. But Gideon was blocking the stairs, rifles still raised, and the crowd was pressing closer, all those people he'd hurt finally given permission to speak. Sheriff Hollis, someone shouted. Are you going to arrest him or not? Hollis looked at Thornhill, at the crowd, at Evelyn holding the journal. The calculation was visible on his face, weighing his loyalty against his survival. I need to see that evidence, he said finally. No, Thornhill hissed. You work for me. I own you. Not anymore. Hollis holstered his gun and moved toward Evelyn. Hand it over. Let's see what's really in there. Thornhill lunged, grabbed the journal from Evelyn's hands and ran. But Gideon was faster. He swept Thornhill's legs and the man went down hard, the journal flying from his grip. It landed at the edge of the platform. What happened next was chaos. Thornhill scrambled for the journal, but Reeves got there first, snatching it up. Hollis shouted for everyone to stay calm. People were rushing the platform from all sides. And then a shot rang out. Evelyn heard it before she felt it. A crack like thunder, impossibly loud. Then fire bloomed in her side and she was falling. The platform tilted. Someone screamed her name. She hit the boards hard and the world went white with pain. When her vision cleared, Gideon was above her, his hands pressed to her side, his face terrified. Stay with me, he was saying. Evelyn, stay with me. She tried to answer but couldn't get her breath. Looked past him and saw Thornhill still on the ground. A deputy's gun in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel. You stupid girl, Thornhill spat. You think this changes anything? You think... Gideon's fist connected with his face and Thornhill's head snapped back. He didn't get up again. We need a doctor, Gideon was shouting. Someone get a doctor. Evelyn's vision was darkening at the edges. She could feel blood soaking through her shirt, warm and wet. Her father's journal was somewhere nearby. She'd done it, exposed him, told the truth. She just hoped she'd live to see what came next. The doctor's office smelled like carbolic and old wood. Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments, hushed voices, the sting of antiseptic, Gideon's hand gripping hers like he could keep her alive through sheer force of will. When she finally woke properly, sunlight was streaming through a window, and her whole body felt like it had been run over by a wagon. Easy. Gideon was beside the bed instantly. Don't try to move. You're stitched up, but it's bad. How bad? Her voice came out as a croak. Bullet went through. Missed anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. His face was haggard. Doctor says you'll live if you don't do anything stupid, which means you stay in this bed for at least a week. The journal? Safe. Hollis has it. He's using it to build a case. Gideon helped her drink some water. Thornhill's in custody. Real custody, not just locked in his own hotel suite. They brought in a federal marshal from Denver, same one your father had on his list. Daniel Cross. Evelyn's eyes widened. He came? Catherine sent a telegram the day of the ceremony, told him everything. He rode straight through, got here 3 days ago. Gideon sat back. Turns out Marshal Cross has been investigating Thornhill for years, but could never make anything stick. Your father's journal gives him everything he needs. Dates, names, evidence. Thornhill's done. 3 days? Evelyn blinked. How long have I been unconscious? 4 days. You had an infection. We weren't sure you'd... His voice caught. But you're stubborn and mean, so you pulled through. She tried to smile, but it hurt too much. What about Catherine? Reeves, the others? All fine. Catherine's been here every day. The miners are being hailed as heroes. Even the town's turned on Thornhill. People are coming forward with stories, evidence, things they've been too scared to say for years. He took her hand carefully. You did it, Evelyn. You exposed him, changed everything. We did it, she corrected. All of us. The door opened and Catherine came in carrying a basket of food. When she saw Evelyn was awake, her face lit up. You're back. Thank goodness. Gideon's been unbearable with worry. I have not, Gideon muttered. You threatened to shoot the doctor if he didn't check on her every hour. That was one time. Despite the pain, Evelyn laughed, then immediately regretted it as her stitches pulled. Ow, don't make me laugh. They caught her up on everything she'd missed. Thornhill had been charged with fraud, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and negligent homicide. Sheriff Hollis had turned on him completely, providing testimony in exchange for leniency. The territorial governor had gotten involved. It was going to trial, and everyone expected a conviction. The families from Fuller Creek are getting their water rights back, Catherine said. The Blackstone widows are suing Thornhill's estate for damages. And there's talk of reform, new oversight for land offices, independent mine inspections, actual accountability. It'll take years to undo all the damage, Evelyn said quietly. All the lives he destroyed. Maybe, but it's a start, Catherine squeezed her hand. Your father would be proud. Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn healed slowly. The bullet wound closed. The infection cleared. Her strength returned in increments. Gideon barely left her side, and when he did, it was only to bring food or check on the preparations for the trial. Marshal Cross came to visit once. He was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Your father was a good man, Miss Harrow. He did the work no one else was willing to do. This journal, he held it up carefully. This is going to change things, not just here, across the whole territory. Will it be enough? Evelyn asked. To convict him? More than enough. Thornhill's done. His lawyers know it. They're trying to negotiate a plea, but I'm not inclined to give them one. Cross set the journal down. You nearly died bringing this to light. The least I can do is make sure it counts. When he left, Evelyn looked at Gideon. What happens now, after the trial? What do you want to happen? She thought about it. About the mountain cabin and the months spent learning to survive. About the journey down and everything they'd lost and gained along the way. I want to go home. To where? Your father's house? No. She took his hand. The cabin. The mountain. That's home now. Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. You sure? It's isolated up there. Hard living. Gets lonely. It's not lonely if you're not alone, she said quietly. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Then we go home. Soon as you're strong enough to ride. The trial lasted 3 days. Evelyn was still too weak to attend, but Catherine and Gideon went and brought back reports each evening. The prosecution presented her father's journal as evidence. Witness after witness took the stand. Miners, ranchers, shopkeepers, all telling their stories. The defense tried to discredit the journal, tried to claim it was fabricated, but the sheer volume of corroborating testimony made their arguments fall apart. On the third day, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Thornhill was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized to pay restitution to his victims. His business empire was dismantled piece by piece. The man who'd seemed untouchable was destroyed in a single afternoon. When Gideon brought the news, Evelyn cried, not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like drowning. Her father's death hadn't been meaningless. The risk had been worth it. Justice, imperfect and incomplete as it was, had finally come. A month after the shooting, Evelyn was strong enough to travel. They said goodbye to Catherine, who was returning to her teaching with plans to write a book about everything that had happened. They said goodbye to Reeves and the other miners, who were working with Marshal Cross to reform mining safety laws. They said goodbye to Bellwood, which was slowly transforming into something better than what it had been. And then they rode north, back toward the mountain. The journey took 5 days. Evelyn's wound still ached, and she tired easily, but with each mile she felt stronger. The towns and people fell away behind them. The air grew colder and cleaner. The peaks rose ahead like old friends welcoming them back. When they finally reached the cabin, it was exactly as they'd left it. Roof intact, door hanging slightly crooked, the whole place covered in a fresh layer of snow. "Home," Evelyn said. They spent the rest of the day getting settled, built a fire, unpacked what few supplies they'd brought, made dinner from dried meat and beans. It was simple and rough and perfect. That night, lying in the narrow bed while Gideon dozed by the fire, Evelyn thought about everything that had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been desperate and alone, thrown into the street with nowhere to turn. Now she had a home, a purpose, someone who'd stood beside her through hell and hadn't flinched. "Gideon?" she called softly. "Hmm? Come here." He stirred, looked over at her. "You need something?" "Yeah." She patted the bed beside her. "Come here." He hesitated, then stood and crossed to the bed, sat on the edge. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. She took his hand. "I don't want you sleeping on the floor anymore. There's room." "Evelyn, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," she said quickly. "I just want you close. After everything we've been through, I don't want to spend another night with you 20 feet away." He searched her face. Then carefully, he lay down beside her. She curled against him, her head on his chest, and felt his arm come around her shoulders. "This okay?" he asked quietly. "Perfect." They lay like that for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind move through the pines. Finally, Gideon said, "You know we can't stay up here forever. Marshal Cross wants us to testify at more trials, Thornhill's associates, the corrupt sheriffs. It's going to be months of travel and courtrooms." "I know." "And after that?" "After that, we come back here. We rebuild. Make this place a real home." She tilted her head to look up at him. "Maybe help other people who need it. People like Garrett or Catherine who are too scared to stand up alone. Give them a place to be safe while they figure out what comes next." Gideon was quiet, but she felt him nod. "I like that. Turning this into something good, something that helps instead of just hiding. My father always said the only way to fight darkness is to build something bright enough to push it back. Maybe this is how we do that." "Maybe." He pulled her closer. "We'll figure it out as we go." Spring came slowly to the mountain. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and new growth. Evelyn's wound healed into a scar, thick and puckered, a permanent reminder of the cost of standing up. She didn't mind it. Scars proved you'd survived. They made the journey to Denver twice that spring for trials. Each time, Evelyn testified about her father's work and the contents of his journal. Each time, justice came a little closer to being complete. And each time, they returned to the mountain a little more certain that they'd made the right choice. By summer, they'd expanded the cabin, built on a second room, fixed the roof properly, planted a garden. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster, that Gideon Vale's place was safe for people who needed help. A woman fleeing an abusive husband showed up in June. A family driven off their land by illegal foreclosure came in July. A young man falsely accused of theft arrived in August. They stayed until they were strong enough to leave, and when they left, they were different, steadier, ready to face whatever came next. In October, on a day when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled like wood smoke, Gideon asked Evelyn to marry him. He did it without ceremony, just handed her a simple silver ring while they were splitting firewood, and said, "Figured it was time to make this official." She said yes before he'd finished the sentence. They were married by a traveling preacher a week later, with Catherine and Reeves and a dozen other people they'd helped standing witness. It wasn't fancy. Evelyn wore a dress Catherine had altered, and Gideon wore his cleanest shirt. But when they spoke their vows, promising to stand together through whatever storms came, Evelyn felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for months. They'd found each other in the worst circumstances, had survived things that should have broken them, and somehow, against all odds, they'd built something worth keeping. That winter was easier than the one before. They had supplies and company. The cabin that had once felt like a prison now felt like a refuge. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled and the snow piled high, Evelyn would lie beside Gideon and think about how far she'd come from that desperate woman thrown into the mud in cold water. She'd been certain she was going to die that night, certain there was no way forward. And then Gideon had appeared and offered her one brutal choice: stay and die, or come with him and earn her survival. She'd chosen to live, and in living, she'd learned to fight. And in fighting, she'd changed not just her own fate, but the fates of dozens of others. Marcus Thornhill's empire was gone. The families he'd destroyed were rebuilding. The systems he'd corrupted were being reformed. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect, but it was better, fairer, closer to justice. And up on the mountain, in a cabin that had become home, Evelyn and Gideon built a life worth fighting for. They helped anyone who needed it. They testified whenever justice required them. They loved each other fiercely and without reservation. Years later, when people told the story of how Marcus Thornhill fell, they always started the same way, with a woman thrown into the street on the coldest night of winter, and a man who refused to let her die. They talked about the journal and the trial and the reforms that followed, but Evelyn knew the real story was simpler than that. It was about choosing to stand up when staying down was safer, about trusting someone when trust seemed impossible, about believing that even in the harshest places, even against the cruelest odds, ordinary people could do extraordinary things. And about love, not the easy kind, but the kind forged in fire and sealed with blood and built to last through whatever storms the world threw at it. That was the story that mattered. That was the story worth telling.